Okay, so grasslands on the whole in the UK are classified as cereal communities, which means that they require some form of management to prevent them from succeeding into scrub and woodland. And there's obviously a whole variety of different ways that you can manage your grassland to prevent succession. So grazing, cutting are the general means of doing this. If you don't manage your grassland, then it will eventually succeed into scrub and eventually woodland. And I don't want to say that scrub is a bad thing, because scrub can add a real extra dimension to grasslands, particularly for insects and birds. They provide shelter on sunny, windy days for butterflies, for example. So actually having scrub in your grassland could be a real positive thing. It could obviously be a bit of a pain if you want to cut it on a regular basis with big pieces of machinery, but yeah, don't underestimate how valuable scrub is. There are grassland communities in the UK that aren't classified as cereal communities, and these are grasslands that might, or on the whole, retain their grassland status when left unmanaged. So in Devon, examples of that would be coastal grasslands and also sand dunes. These experience quite dramatic and extreme conditions which prevent the woody species that you tend to associate with scrub from developing. And some lovely photographs there. Thornton Berries on the right, and some coastal grasslands in South Devon on the left with wild thyme, and Gibbons and various other delights. So things that affect grassland type.
Hannah, can you speak up a little bit?
Oh, sorry,
Thank you.
the things that affect grassland type, there's lots of variables that all work together to create conditions which then affect grassland plants and dictate whether they can grow successfully or not in a given situation. So the hydrology of the site, whether it's wet or dry, the pH, whether it's acidic, neutral or calcareous, the management that's being carried out at that site, but like Matt just mentioned, not only the management that's being carried out now or in the recent past, also management that's been carried out in the historical past too can actually affect grasslands for the long term. The minerals that are present within the soil, and that's largely associated with the soil type and the geology of that given area. The altitude and the latitude of your site, so where you're located and the climate that's associated with that location. And also the nutrients that are present in the soil. And the nutrient levels can be naturally quite rich if you've got a meadow next to a river, for example. So if meadows are flooded on a regular basis, those fields would naturally be fairly nutrient rich. However, the vast majority of nutrients are added to the soil in an artificial basis, I suppose, through fertilisation. So the addition of organic or inorganic fertilisers. So all of these things work together and create a condition which allows plants or not to grow on your field. So just kind of continuing on with what Matt was talking about really. So we've got two very different photographs. The one on the left is a heavily improved grassland field, which is actually in Somerset, but we do get them in Devon as well. A field that is actually a ley, so it's been ploughed and reseeded fairly recently. That field is largely dominated by ryegrasses, and ryegrasses are really easy to spot because they're very shiny undersides of the leaves. So you can very often see the kind of shiny underside of the leaves kind of moving around in the wind. So you can very easily spot an improved grassland. It looks very lush, a bit like a clover advert. And then on the right, we've got an incredibly lovely species-rich meadow that's found in East Devon in this example. Lots of different patterns of leaves, lots of different shades of colour, lots of different types of grasses, and a huge variety of wildflowers, lots of knapweed, locally known as hardheads. So right variety and a real mixture. And as Matt was saying, there's been a huge decrease in the amount of species-rich grassland that we've got in this country now. The statistics are really quite scary. 97% of all species-rich grasslands have been lost in the last 100 years. So that really puts into perspective how important species-rich grasslands are that are left now. And that's largely due to agricultural intensification. So on one side of the spectrum we have species-poor improved grasslands. On the other side of the spectrum we've got very species-rich unimproved grasslands, and there's a huge variety of grasslands that fit in that semi-improved middle section. You have some really nice examples of semi-improved grasslands, of which this is a photograph, lots of common vetch and lesser trefoil. And I really think that although once people are told they've got semi-improved grassland, their main aim, if they're interested in meadows, is to try and make it species rich as possible. But I do believe that we need to appreciate our semi-improved grasslands a bit more, because we've lost so much of our grasslands to intensive, very, very species poor meadows, actually the semi-improved grasslands that we do have, you know, they have great potential, and we need to actually appreciate the common vetches and the lesser trefoils because they still provide flowers for pollinators and other insects to make use of. So I think if you do own semi-improved grassland, don't feel that it's only semi-improved grassland. I think it's a really good start, and you could have some nice species present. So there are various patterns to think about when you're looking at vegetation, and pH tends to kind of dictate something. And acid grasslands, so I've got a photo on the left of an acid grassland, and you can see lots of heath bedstraw and some tormental in amongst some fine-leaved grasses. And on the right, I've got a photo of a calcareous grassland with some scabious. And acid grassland, even when it's unimproved, tends to be far less diverse than calcareous grassland. Calcareous grassland can have up to 60 species per square metre, which is absolutely incredible. And acid grassland doesn't ever tend to get anywhere near that in terms of diversity, even if it has been left unimproved for a very long period of time. So on the whole, acid grasslands don't tend to be as diverse. So that's sometimes can be quite an important thing to remember. So what I was hoping to do is go through the grassland priority habitats that we have in Devon. So priority habitats are habitats that have been highlighted as being ecologically important because they either are very diverse and more often than not, they have been reduced in area, and so they are of conservation concern. So I'm going to go through the kind of types of grassland that we've got in Devon. So lowland meadows are typically mesotrophic, which means they are fairly neutral in terms of their pH. And on the whole, when people are trying to create species-rich meadows, this is the kind of thing they're trying to create. So lots of oxeye daisy and knapweed, meadow vetchling, things like that. And we actually in Devon have quite a lot of this when compared to other counties. And the vast majority of these lowland meadows are actually found on steep slopes where farmers have been less able to access with machinery, so fertilising a steep slope is very difficult. So we tend to find a lot of these fields on steep slopes. So these two examples were hay meadows in East Devon actually, and they've managed to be present till today, which is great. Lowland acid grasslands are grasslands that are found under 300 metres above sea level, and they have acidic pH. Species that you would associate with acid grassland would be betony on the left, and again another photograph showing lots of heath bedstraw and some tormental. They tend to be grazed by sheep, and because Devon's quite acidic in nature, we tend to find quite a lot of this in Devon, particularly on Dartmoor. So something that the guys who are associated with the Moor Meadows group will probably be quite familiar with this type of grassland community. Purple moorgrass and rush pasture. I've got a bit of a soft spot for this habitat, so I worked on the Grassland Project in North Devon. Purple moorgrass and rush pasture, known locally in Devon as Colne grassland, known in South Wales as rose pasture, and I think that's also how Dartmoor National Park like to refer to it as. Dominated by purple moorgrass, otherwise known as Millennia, and rushes. In very lovely examples of this type of vegetation, you have meadow thistle, which is shown here. You can also get a whole variety of different species, sneezewort and sawwort, for example, and also devil's bit scabious, which is the food plant of the European protected marsh fritillary butterfly, which Devon has a stronghold for. So we're an important county for the marsh fritillary butterfly. And there's also the lesser butterfly orchid, which you can sometimes find in this vegetation type on Dartmoor. So eyes peeled if you own that kind of habitat. Upland hay meadows, again, are present over 300 metres above sea level. This is an example of a photograph taken on Dartmoor, so lots of eyebright, lots of red clover, managed through hay cutting, a late hay cut. Sometimes traditionally upland hay meadows have been treated with farmyard manure just to keep fertility up in terms of trying to actually get some hay crop rather than just ending up with a couple of sticks, which some people might end up with. But that is actually a traditional management for hay meadows in most places. In Devon, particularly on Dartmoor, we have a rare species of eyebright called Vider's eyebright, or Cornish eyebright, which is a photo of down here, and that's characterised by its purpley red flowers, and also has lots of tiny little glandular hairs on the top parts of the plant as well, so it's quite cute. Calcareous grassland, I smuggled in a few photos of them. Calcareous grassland isn't a particularly important, well, not important, it's not a habitat that's found all that regularly in Devon, but we do have areas of it down near Torbay and also down by Plymouth, as well as East Devon. And if you haven't been to a site, it's called Gaunton Common near Paynton. It's an open access land, and it's a really lovely spot to see calcareous grassland. So if you're ever down that way, I definitely recommend popping over. And on that photo on the left, on the verge, you can see there's lots and lots of ladies' bedstraw, which is a species you don't tend to find inland in Devon all that much. So it's a really great site. So I recommend a visit there if you haven't been. And there's Fennel, my dog. Enjoying the green-winged dorcas at a calcareous grassland site. Maritime cliff and slope. So obviously Devon, having two coastlines, has a lot of coastal grassland, and this is a photograph taken at Berry Head, which is a great site, again, well if you've never been there, where we have an incredibly rare plant, which is called white rock rose, which is nationally rare, which that photograph's up there. So really important for insects, and very, very biodiverse, lots of kidney vetch and thrift, and specialist plants that are able to cope with saline habitats. So management of grasslands, there's lots of different ways that we manage grasslands, and cows are quite interesting in the way they feed. So they actually use their tongue to grasp grass, and they grasp with their tongue and they tear it out, and that means they can't actually choose individual plants. So their selection in terms of grazing isn't that great. They kind of go to a general area, okay, grab that, use their tongue, grasp and pull. So that can be great if you've got rare plants in your vegetation, because it means they don't tend to just pick out every tiny example of a given species. And because of that tearing nature, they also create grasslands that have really interesting structural diversity. So you'll have lower areas with a lower sward height, areas with a higher sward height. And because they also avoid eating near where they've pooed, you tend to have really long grass that comes up in other places. So that structural variation is really, really interesting and great for insects. So cows have a really interesting way of eating, which is great when it comes to conserving plants in grasslands. Here's my friendly sheep. Sheep eat in a very different way. They've got very small little mouths, their teeth can get really close to the ground, and their lips are very agile, and they're able to pick out individual plants and choose exactly what they want to eat. So if you've got a grassland that's full of vegetation and you've got a special plant you love, if your sheep have a bit of a fancying for that particular species, it could just nibble it all out. So it kind of depends what you want to achieve in terms of your grassland, and you know what species you want to graze there will vary depending on what your objectives are. So, but also sheep can be great when it comes to grazing short turf. So some calcareous grassland sites in Wiltshire or wherever do really, really well with sheep grazing. So it kind of depends what the vegetation type is, and in terms of what animal you might choose to graze. Ponies are a little bit in the middle. They're heavy like cows, so they create patches in the ground, so they disturb the ground with their hooves, which creates germination spots for seedlings, so that can be useful. But alternatively, because they're heavy, if it's very wet, then they might poach the ground a bit too much. But they do also have quite a lot of flexibility with their lips, so they're also able to choose what they want to a certain degree, and they also can eat quite close to the ground as well. So they're a little bit of an in-between between cattle and sheep. Ponies, particularly the traditional breeds, can be really good if you're trying to revigorate grassland that's been left unmanaged for a long period of time. They're great at taking and eating tough material. So if you want to reinstate a grassland that's become scrubbed over or has become dominated by coarse grasses, getting ponies in could be a really good way of reinvigorating that grassland too. So hay cutting, a traditional management technique that's been carried out for hundreds of years. On the whole, a late hay cut is really good because it allows the plants to set seed, and then obviously they're reproducing. However, I think if you cut your field at exactly the same time every year, you end up selecting and promoting certain species. So if you carry out a late hay cut every single year, the likelihood is you're going to promote species such as knapweed. And if you want a knapweed heavy field, that's great. But it might be you want to mix the diversity up a bit. So I would probably recommend hay cutting and mixing the date in which you hay cut, because then you're kind of like not necessarily just promoting one species, you're kind of providing a little bit of variation. When you think about hay cutting in the past, people would have made the most of the hay cutting period as it happened. They didn't have stewardship dates that they had to abide by, and actually, and that traditional method has been very good to date. So actually having a little bit of variation in cutting dates I think is a good thing, but cutting too early on a regular basis isn't a good thing. Matt touched on silage. So in North Devon there have been up to 5 silage cuts in 1 year on certain fields, which is absolutely incredible. There's not many species that can hack having their head cut off 5 times in a growing season, and grasses have their active growing part quite low down on the plant, and they can get their heads cut off quite easily, and then they produce tillers and rhizomes, and they actually do really well in a very regularly cut environment. And that's why we have lawns that are dominated by grasses. You know, they thrive in that condition. But the vast majority of meadow plants don't like being cut on a regular basis, and even perennials, if they're cut regularly before flowering and setting seed, they won't last very long. So on the whole, silage isn't great for wildflowers, and also not very good for ground nesting birds either. So the increase in silage management has obviously had a very negative impact on wildlife overall in the UK. So if you want to increase species diversity on your land, there's lots of things you can do. And just changing management actually can be beneficial to start with. So you could consider changing the cutting time if you're cutting, taking cuttings from the site rather than just leaving them there can be very beneficial, clearing scrub or even encouraging scrub growth, changing the grazing time and density of grazing, choosing the animals that are most relevant to what you're trying to achieve, so grazing with different animals, and then obviously not adding nutrients can be very beneficial as well if fertiliser is being added. And if you do those things, if you do change management, then it's just a kind of bit of a waiting game to see if anything happens. It's worth noting that grassland plant seeds do not tend to last very long in a seed bank. Heathland plants do have a long-lasting seed bank period. So heather, for example, can last a very long time as a seed in the seed bank. Lots of grassland plants don't last very long. So it might be that you're creating the perfect conditions for grassland plants, but it just might be that those seeds aren't present in the seed bank. So you're going to have to artificially bring seeds into the site. If you've got a species-rich field next door, then that might happen naturally, but largely we don't live next to a drip SI or a lovely species-rich wildlife site. So we have to actually add species to our meadows. And if you're going to do that, it's really good to create a suitable germinating bed. And that's often done by creating bare ground. And ideally, bare ground at a rate of 50 to 75% is what's recommended. So when you do that, it looks absolutely horrific and you feel like you've destroyed somebody's fields. But it is actually really beneficial for the long term. And it's amazing how quickly a harrowed field will green up again. And obviously on a small scale you can use a rake. Devon Wildlife Trust really lucky, they've got a brush seed harvester which they use to collect seeds, and it's obviously very tiring work because I'm very because it's not spreading the seeds can be done by hand, but again you could use ironically a fertiliser spreader, which is a little bit odd, but it works really well. And seeds are spread at a rate of 10 to 15 kilograms per hectare, so it's quite a lot of seed. Alternatively, you can use green hay as a means of moving seed from one site to another. The bales need to be transported really quickly because they heat up very quickly, so 6 hours even sometimes bales can heat up, so they need to be moved rapidly to your receptor site. And then it's really beneficial to graze very, very tightly with sheep to try and stop that grass from rejuvenating and covering over those bare patches that you've created. Just quickly, I've been doing some surveys for Devon Wildlife Trust for the last 3 or 4 years, and I've been surveying sites that we've been green haying, and there are 19 sites that I surveyed last year, 3 of which I've surveyed for 3 years in a row. And as you can see, the red block means improved grassland, orange means semi-improved, and green means species rich. And this is using a Natural England survey methodology, so I haven't just made it up. And as you can see, it's really nice to actually get some proper evidence to say that what we're doing is actually creating species rich grassland that Natural England would allow you to put the species rich grassland option on, in theory, in stewardship. So in 3 years, the 3 sites that were oversown in green hay have all been classified now as species rich grassland. And interestingly, 3 of the 6 sites that were oversown on green hay in 2017 were classified as species rich only 2 years after, the first year after that had actually happened. So the work that Devon Wildlife Trust is actually carrying out really is working, and it's really nice to see some actual statistics that states that. Am I doing really badly on time? Or, yes. Yellow rattle is a hemiparasite people use loads in grassland restoration, and it gains its nutrients or energy from the sun, but also it steals energy via its roots from other grassland plants. And people tend to think that it's only grasses that it parasitises, but it does actually parasitise other meadow plants as well, and that is the case particularly for legumes, so birds of trefoil and vetches, for example. But it also steals nutrients from itself, which is quite interesting. So it creates a network of nutrient transfer all the way around the field, which is really cool. And this is a very, very yellow rattle rich field. I mean, that's pretty crazy. I surveyed that field last week. And the number of pollinators and bees in that field was absolutely unbelievable. And just to put it into context, that's what the field looked like last year. So, although it could be counted as a monoculture in some respects in terms of yellow rattle currently, the amount of insects in that field was dramatically higher than it was only a year ago. And in time, that yellow rattle won't be dominant. It will create a kind of natural balance with the other plants that are present within the field. I found a whole variety of lovely plants in these fields that we've been oversowing in green haying. Eyebright, knapweed, betony, ragged robin, pignut, that's a bit of a strange one, devil's bit scabious, and also wild caraway. So there's some absolutely amazing, lovely species that are cropping up. Just a little bit about pollination. So insects and plants have been evolved together for hundreds, thousands of millions of years, and we think plants look absolutely beautiful. We fill our gardens with plants, but you need to remember that plants have actually evolved to encourage insects to think they look beautiful, and that's not necessarily for our eyes. And the whole relationship they have with each other is, on the whole, symbiotic, in that they both gain something. The plant gains sexual reproduction, and the insect gains a reward, either by either receiving pollen or nectar, or both, depending on what it wants. I'm just rattling through this now, I'm a bit conscious that I'm being too slow. But I found some really cool images on the internet, and it really makes you realise how our eyes totally don't appreciate how beautiful plants can actually be. So this is the UV, this is like flowers under UV, and you can see even the plain old dandelion looks pretty remarkable to a bee. And also, as does nipplewort. So, so I think that's quite, and I can tell you the website of that if you're interested. Plants, flowers take different shapes, and they evolve separately to allow pollination. Some species are wind pollinated, such as ribwort plantain. Buttercups and poppies have a bowl-shaped flower, and they, on the whole, don't offer very much nectar. And they're open access flowers, so that lots of different insects can go and gather the pollen. Lipped flowers, such as vetches, are highly specialised in terms of their evolution, and they provide a lower lip which allows the bees to land on the lower lip, and then they shove their head right into the flower, and in that process the plant deposits a small amount of pollen on the back of the bee, and that area of the bee where it can't get off. And then it flies around and then goes into another flower and obviously carries out the pollination there. Composites look like a flower, but they actually comprise, that central button section of the daisy comprises of hundreds of tiny little florets that are all jam-packed together. And some of those buttons are very, very, very jam-packed and comprise of tiny little florets, insects, which are great for tiny insects, and some others are a bit looser and more suitable for larger insects. The campions have a deep tube, which are accessible to insects with long tongues, so butterflies and long-tongued bees, for example. And then umbels, such as cow parsley, they just provide an open, flat surface, which is very often used by small flies and hoverflies, and they just wander along the surface and gather the pollen. So there's lots of different ways that plants have evolved, along with insects, to allow pollination to occur. And probably a bit of a depressing thing to say, but it's worth just putting out statistics. So I think it's 40% of all insect species worldwide have experienced a decline in the last 15 years. So that's a really incredible piece of science that came out last year. And also there's 40 million fewer birds now in the UK than there were in 1966. And it's not to say that this is all because our species-rich grasslands have been lost to intensive agriculture, but that is definitely going to play a part. And so, everybody's here because they're really interested in grasslands and meadows. And I think, that's a really good start. And all of the work that More Meadows have been carrying out in terms of helping people restore their grasslands is absolutely wonderful. So, the last thing I want to say is, love your meadow and appreciate it. We really don't have as many as we should have, and the fact that everybody's here is great. And keep doing all the good work that you're doing. It's really good.